Chief Meteorologist Tom Coomes here, and I want to talk about tornado warnings or the lack of tornado warnings with quick spin-up tornadoes. These are often very difficult to warn about because they're over almost as quickly as they happen. That's really the gist of these tornadoes. But there were warnings for the recent round of tornadoes on Wednesday, March 19th across northern Indiana. This is some of the damage. These are not devastating, deadly tornadoes. These are quick spin-ups that caused damage. Some of the distinct clues here with this clump of trees is the fact that they're kind of laying in different directions. That's the typical, is the debris kind of circulated around or is it all laying in one direction to determine if it was straight line wind or a tornado. And in some cases, the answer is it was both. And then you look at the type of damage, and this is significant damage. Now, keep in mind this structure, we'll talk more about this in a second, isn't the most sturdy structure. So it's easy for pieces or the entire structure, a shed, can easily fail in a weak tornado or even straight line wind of 70 to 80 miles per hour. This is a surveyed path of the EF0 tornado that touched down between Macy and Akron, Indiana. This is between Miami and Fulton County on Wednesday evening around 8:20. The path of it was less than 3 miles, the width of a football field, and it was only on the ground for 3 minutes. And that's really key here. It really was over before you could probably even technically write a warning and post it. It was already over. And that's just, I'm going to be honest with you, a limitation of radar. We can see rotation, we can see wind movements to a certain extent, but typically it takes more than one or two scans to really see a trend. Not just one scan is kind of that smoking gun. This is the rotation tracker. So this is kind of takes an assessment of what has happened, not as it's happening, but kind of compiles data that has happened. And so this is looking back at time from 8:45 Wednesday evening, and this lines up pretty well with where the damage was and where the projected tornado was. There was also straight line wind damage with this as well, which kind of shows you that this is probably a downburst, quick spin up type situation. The path of this area of rotation was roughly 8 miles, but it was only a small 3-mile section that actually a tornado was on the ground. And for people saying that they were looking at the radar and they could clearly see that, they don't really explain the limitations of radar. Just one image doesn't mean a tornado was likely there, especially in these situations. There are other situations with much stronger tornadoes where it can be quickly confirmed by radar. But this environment had multiple areas that were quite similar, but only one tornado touching down. So it's not the smoking gun that there was a tornado, but there were warnings. Not tornado warnings, but there were warnings. A severe thunderstorm warning for a tornado possible was already issued for Cass County near Logansport, going back to the 8 o'clock, 7:45 to 8 o'clock, lasting until 8:15. That same warning, or a new warning, was then extended through Miami and into Fulton and Kosciuszko County for the similar concern. And there were a handful of reports, but this was now after sunset. It was getting dark, and so there weren't a lot of reports saying this was clearly a tornado or a situation where tornadoes were happening. It was more so after the fact. All these are limitations and difficulty that when a tornado is spotted, it lines up with the radar. That's a quick warning. But in this case, we warned for the possibility that, hey, there could be a very quick spin up. And you see here, after the fact, yeah, okay, there's a kind of a notch in this part of the radar signature. It seems to line up with some of the velocity, which really wasn't all that impressive, that, yeah, a tornado may have spin up. And then a lot of people were hinting on, was there a tornado debris signature? At 8:20, technically this scan just before 8:20, this was the first TDS, tornado debris signature. And it's the start of something, but if this is the only picture you had, I wouldn't say, oh, wow, that is definitely a tornado. Leading up to this, there wasn't anything. Now, in subsequent scans, the next two scans at 8:25 and 8:31, now we have a trend that you might say, hey, maybe there was a tornado. The problem here, at least as far as we know from the survey, these two scans were after the tornado happened. It's probably debris that was lofted in the air. And it's kind of amazing in itself that there was this much of a debris signature with this weak of a tornado. It may have just hit the right shed or something that was just blown up into the air quite easily and highly reflective, but you don't always get this good of a debris signature even with much larger tornadoes. That's what's kind of amazing here. Going back to some of the damage, this is out of Akron, Indiana. An EF0 was the rating. There were also tornadoes that touched down in Gary, and this did more significant damage to the roof of homes, also to trees, kind of shredding them in some back deck areas, and that's where we get into the EF scale. Keep in mind, the tornado survey is after the fact, but an EF0 typically is some damage to trees and weak buildings, like a shed can be blown apart, but homes are pretty much intact. Then as you look at the difference to an EF1 tornado, wind of 86 to 110 miles per hour, and a lot of these near the Gary area were rated in excess of 85 miles per hour. We had those damage to the roof of homes, and that's kind of the dead giveaway that the wind was stronger. As you get much higher, up to 135 and EF2, you start ripping roofs off homes. EF3, not much of a home is left. You can flip over cars. Typically trees or anything are shredded. EF4 to EF5, there's very little left to be seen. But for those who say, it was no doubt there was a tornado on the ground, they're kind of lying to you. There are limitations in what we can, as meteorologists, can actually detect with radar. It has its limitations. It can't see into the future. You can't see a tornado technically before it's happening. You may see some hints and some clues that tell you that should be a tornado warned storm, and there's some algorithms for that. But typically in a situation like we had on Wednesday, these are very marginal situations where there's not a distinct target to say there's a tornado. It's more so there's an area where a tornado could happen and you should take action. And the lesson for us also is it's more than just tornado warnings to be aware of. Severe thunderstorm warnings should also be respected, and you should take precautions when those are issued for your area and make sure you have ways of getting those alerts and taking the right action. Typically, being inside, away from windows, is going to be safe enough for most severe thunderstorm warnings. Some, though, we do have to treat with the respect of a tornado warning if the wind gusts are substantial or there's that threat of tornadoes. Hope this was helpful. Again, this was a very successful warning process of the threat that was there, but we need to realize what the limitations are of radar.